The video opens with a close-up on the narrator, Elena, a woman in her late 20s. She's in a simple, warm-looking workshop. Behind her are industrial coffee roasting machines and burlap sacks of beans. She looks directly at the camera, her expression calm, but with a deep, knowing intensity. She speaks in a steady, measured voice. My family built a billion-dollar coffee empire on my grandfather's dying wish. Last night, at the gala celebrating their genius, they named their crowning achievement after him. They didn't know I was in the audience, and they didn't know I brought the receipt. It wasn't a piece of paper. It was his truth. And by the time I was done, their whole world had been ground to dust. They forgot the most important rule of the family business. The person who knows the beans knows where all the bodies are buried. And I'm the only one left who speaks the language of the harvest. This all came to a head at the National Food and Beverage Innovators Gala. Think the Oscars, but for people who get way too excited about artisanal mayonnaise and ethically sourced sparkling water. My family's company, Aroma Republic, was the guest of honor. They were receiving the Legacy Award, a prize meant to celebrate a brand that honors its roots while pushing the industry forward. The irony was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. My mother, Isabel, the CEO, was on stage looking like a queen carved from ice, dressed in a silver gown that probably cost more than my car. Beside her, my older brother, Leo, the CFO, was beaming, his suit perfectly tailored, his smile perfectly fake. He's the numbers guy, the one who sees our grandfather's life's work as a series of profitable SKUs. They were accepting the award for their newest, most successful product line, the Antonio Collection, named for my grandfather. They marketed it as a tribute, a blend they'd painstakingly reverse-engineered from his old journals. The media ate it up. A story of legacy, of a new generation honoring the old. It was the cornerstone of their whole PR strategy for the year. From my seat in the back, just another face in a sea of tuxedos and gowns, I watched them hold up the award. The light caught the gold plating, and for a second, it looked like a weapon. Isabel leaned into the microphone, her voice smooth as silk. "We are so humbled," she began. "My father, Antonio, was a visionary. He believed that coffee was more than a drink. It was a story in a cup. And tonight, we feel his presence here. Leo and I, we felt a duty to continue his narrative. The Antonio Collection isn't just coffee. It's our heart. It's a promise we made to him, to carry his spirit forward." Leo stepped up, adding his own layer of corporate gloss. "The market response has been phenomenal, which just proves that authenticity sells. We took my grandfather's core principles and scaled them for a new era. It's about honoring tradition through innovation. Authenticity." The word hung in the air, sickeningly sweet. I didn't clap. I just sat there, my hands resting on the simple leather-bound portfolio in my lap. Inside it was the real story. Not the one they were selling for $20 a bag, but the one that had been buried for a decade. As they basked in the applause, I just thought to myself, enjoy this moment. It's the last one you'll ever have. I didn't need to stand up and scream. I didn't need to make a scene. The plan was already in motion. The letters had already been sent. The storm wasn't coming. It had already made landfall. They just hadn't heard the thunder yet. To understand how we got here, you have to understand Aroma Republic. It wasn't always this soulless, corporate machine. It started in my grandfather's garage. Just one small sputtering roaster and a dream. He was an artist. He didn't just roast coffee. He listened to it. He could tell by the sound of the beans cracking, the first crack, the second crack, exactly where its soul was. He called me his little bean, and from the time I was old enough to stand on a stool, I was his apprentice. He taught me about soil acidity, elevation, drying methods. He taught me how to cup coffee, to slurp it loudly and let it coat my tongue, searching for notes of jasmine, or dark chocolate, or black cherry. He'd say, "Elena, anyone can burn beans, but to find the story inside, that's magic." My mother, Isabel, never had the patience for it. She saw the garage as a hobby, not a business. She loved the idea of a family legacy, but she hated the grime of it. The dust, the burlap, the manual labor. When my grandfather finally started turning a real profit, opening his first small cafe, that's when she got interested. And when he got sick, that's when she and Leo took over. I was named head of roasting and sourcing, which sounds important. In reality, it meant I was kept in the back, at the roastery, the heart of the operation, while they became the public-facing, glamorous heads of the company. I was the engine. They were the hood ornament. They'd hold board meetings where they'd talk about brand synergy and market penetration. I'd try to explain that the new supplier they'd found was cutting corners, that the beans were cheap, robusta filler, and that it was destroying the integrity of our signature blends. Leo would just wave his hand dismissively. "Elena, the average consumer can't tell the difference. They taste the cream and sugar. The Q4 projections are fantastic. Don't mess with fantastic." He'd say it with a condescending little smile, like I was a child playing with mud pies, while the adults handled the important business. My mother was worse. She'd visit the roastery, walking through in her pristine white pantsuit, careful not to let anything touch her. She wouldn't look at the beans. She'd look at the branding on the sacks. "We need a new design for the bags, Elena. Something more minimalist. This rustic look is tired." I'd tell her the rustic look was because they were actual agricultural products from small batch farms, not widgets from a factory. She'd just sigh. "You have no vision," she told me once, right in front of the entire roasting team. "Your grandfather had the passion, but I have the vision. That's why I'm in charge." They kept me around because I was the only one who could actually do the work. I was the only one who could replicate our grandfather's original recipes, the ones our entire reputation was built on. I was their dirty little secret, a legacy system they couldn't afford to replace. The slow-burning resentment had been building in me for years. It wasn't one single event, but 1,000 tiny cuts. It was the way Leo would present one of my new blends in a meeting as something his team developed. It was the way my mother would give interviews to magazines about her instinctive palate when she couldn't tell a Kenyan bean from a Colombian one. It was the Christmas bonus I got, a gift card to our own coffee shop, while Leo got a new Tesla for exceeding profit expectations. The company was growing, but it was hollowing out. We were selling more coffee than ever, but it was becoming generic, tasteless. It was my grandfather's name on the door, but his soul had been evicted. The worst part was their treatment of his memory. They turned him into a mascot A folksy sepia-toned photograph of him hung in every store. A carefully crafted myth. They would tell stories about him. Stories I knew were false, polished and sanitized for public consumption. They made him into a simple, charming old man, erasing the fierce, brilliant, sometimes difficult artist he actually was. I was living in a ghost story, haunted not by my grandfather, but by the saccharine caricature they'd created in his place. The injustice of it all was a constant low-grade fever. I felt like I was screaming in a soundproof room. I'd go home to my small apartment, smelling of roasted coffee and exhaustion, and just sit in the dark. I knew they were wrong. I knew they were dismantling everything he had built. But what could I do? They had the power, the money, the narrative. I just had the truth. And the truth, I was learning, didn't pay the bills. It was during these long nights that I started going back to his old workshop, the original one behind my childhood home, which they kept for storage. I told myself I was just looking for old equipment, but I knew I was looking for something else. An answer. A weapon. Anything. I'd sift through his old notebooks, his cupping spoons, his half-forgotten sacks of experimental beans. And I felt a growing resolve. They thought I was just the help. They thought I was content to live in the shadows. They had forgotten who I was. I wasn't just his granddaughter. I was his apprentice. And he had taught me to be patient, to wait for the perfect moment to unlock the flavor. The time was coming. I just had to wait for the first crack, the breaking point, the moment the simmering resentment boiled over into cold, calculated action, was the launch of the Antonio collection. It wasn't just another product line. It was the ultimate act of theft. For about a year before my grandfather passed away, he was working on his masterpiece. He called it his Solstice Blend. It was a combination of a rare, honey-processed geisha bean from a specific microlot in Panama that he had a personal relationship with the farmer to secure, and a few other secret varietals. It was incredibly complex, with notes of tropical fruit and bergamot, and a finish that lasted for minutes. He was obsessed. He filled an entire notebook with just his experiments for this one blend. He told me, "Elena, this is my legacy. Not the company, not the money. This is the story I want to tell when I'm gone." He never got to finish it commercially. His health declined too fast. After he died, my mother and Leo cleaned out his workshop. I asked them what happened to his final notebook, the one dedicated to the Solstice Blend. My mother waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, that old thing? It was just rambling nonsense. We have to look forward now, not back." I knew she was lying. I felt it in my bones. But I had no proof. For years, I just assumed it was lost, another piece of him that they had carelessly discarded. Then, 6 months before the gala, they announced it. The Antonio collection. And the flagship product? A blend they called Legacy. They described it with my grandfather's exact words. They talked about the notes of bergamot and tropical fruit. They even fabricated a story about finding his lost journal and using AI technology to decipher his brilliant but chaotic notes. It was a lie so audacious, so profoundly disrespectful, that it broke something inside me. They hadn't just stolen his recipe. They had stolen his voice, his story, and were wearing it like a costume. That was the night I stopped being a victim and started being a detective. I went back to the old workshop. They had cleared out most of it, but they were lazy. They'd left an old filing cabinet rusted shut in the corner. I spent 2 hours with a crowbar and a hammer, prying it open. And there, in the back, tucked inside a folder, labeled Old Tax Receipts, was the notebook. His Solstice Blend notebook. The cover was worn, his familiar scrawl on every page. But tucked into the back sleeve was something else. Something I never knew existed. It was a formal-looking document, typed but signed by him in his unmistakable, elegant script. At the top, it read, The Aroma Republic Covenant. It was his true last will and testament for the company. It wasn't a legal document in the state's eyes, perhaps, but it was a moral one. In it, he laid out his vision. He specified that the company's controlling interest should be split, with Isabel and Leo managing the business side, but he created a new, non-negotiable role, guardian of the craft. This role, he wrote, would hold ultimate veto power over all sourcing and product development. It was to be the conscience of the company. And he named me as the first guardian. He wrote, Elena is the only one who understands the soul of the bean. She is my true successor. Her palette will be our compass. But the final page was the real bombshell. It was a signed, notarized addendum. In it, he gifted the exclusive rights to his final creation, the Solstice Blend, directly to me. Not to the company. To me, personally. He wrote, This is not an asset for the company to exploit. This is a gift for my granddaughter to protect. It may only be produced with her consent and under her personal supervision. They hadn't just stolen a recipe. They had violated a notarized legal directive. They had committed fraud. Seeing that document, I didn't feel rage. I felt a strange, cold clarity. The path forward was suddenly illuminated. I spent the next 6 months preparing. I didn't confront them. I didn't show my hand. I continued to be the quiet, diligent head of roasting. I passed them in the hallways and smiled. I sat through their meetings and took notes. But every night, I was building my case. I made high-resolution scans of every page of the notebook and the covenant. I found 2 of my grandfather's old employees, the ones who had been there at the beginning and had been pushed out by my mother. They both remembered him talking about the covenant and his gift to me. They both signed sworn affidavits. I even sent a sample of their legacy blend and a sample of the raw beans from one of my grandfather's hidden stashes to a food science lab for gas chromatography analysis. The result? A 99.8% chemical match. Irrefutable proof they had used his exact proprietary beans. So when I sat at that gala, watching them accept their award for authenticity, my portfolio felt heavy in my lap. It was the weight of truth. After their speech, during the schmoozing and champagne, I saw Leo making a beeline for the head of a major grocery chain, probably to ink a distribution deal. I just stood up, smoothed down my simple black dress, and walked out of the ballroom. I didn't say a word to anyone. In the quiet of the marble lobby, I took out my phone and sent a single email. The subject line was, The Antonio Collection. It was addressed to my mother, my brother, and the entire board of directors of Aroma Republic. Attached were the scans of the covenant, the lab results, and the affidavits, The body of the email contained only one sentence. As per the attached, all production and sales of the Legacy blend must cease immediately. Await contact from my legal counsel. I hit send, walked out into the cool night air, and for the first time in 10 years, I felt like I could breathe. The show was over. Now, the consequences would begin. Let's rewind, just for a moment, to understand the depth of the silence I grew up in. My childhood wasn't loud or abusive in the traditional sense. There was no shouting, no slammed doors. It was a quieter kind of cruelty, the cruelty of being erased. While my grandfather was alive, I had a champion. He saw me. He heard me. His workshop was my sanctuary. But after he passed, the house fell silent. Isabel and Leo weren't interested in a child. They were interested in an empire, and I was a loose end, a relic of a past they were trying to redesign. I remember my 12th birthday. My grandfather had been gone for about 6 months. He had always made a big deal of my birthday, creating a custom birthday cake-flavored coffee blend, and letting me help him roast it. It was our tradition. That year, I came downstairs, expecting, I don't know what, something. The house was quiet. My mother was on her laptop at the kitchen table, a mountain of spreadsheets in front of her. Leo was on his phone, scrolling endlessly. I stood in the doorway for a full minute before my mother looked up, her eyes unfocused. "Oh, right. It's today," she said. She reached into her purse and pulled out a $50 bill. "Here, go buy yourself something." There was no cake, no card, no happy birthday, just a transaction. I remember going to the mall and just walking around, the $50 bill clutched in my hand, feeling like a ghost. I ended up in a bookstore and bought a thick book on plant genetics, something my grandfather would have found fascinating. It felt like buying a gift for him, not for me. Leo, on the other hand, was the sun around which our family universe revolved. His achievements were magnified, his failures excused. When he got a B on a calculus exam, my mother hired a tutor who cost more per hour than my entire weekly allowance. When I won first place in a citywide science fair for a project on soil chemistry's effect on coffee bean acidity, a project my grandfather had helped me start, my mother glanced at the blue ribbon and said, "That's nice, dear. Just be sure to clean up your mess in the kitchen." Leo's participation trophy for his soccer team was displayed on the mantelpiece for a year. My first place ribbon was left on the counter until it got stained by a coffee ring and was thrown away. This dynamic solidified as we grew older and entered the family business. Leo got the corner office with the view. I got the windowless roastery in the industrial park. He was given a budget for client entertainment that involved lavish dinners and golf trips. I had to submit a 5-page requisition form to get a new set of tasting spoons. They didn't see it as unfairness. They saw it as logic. Leo was client-facing. He needed to project success. I was operations. I needed to be efficient. What they failed to grasp was that the operations were the entire foundation of their success. The product I was creating was the only reason those clients even took Leo's calls. I tried to connect with my mother once, about a year ago. I thought naively that maybe if I could appeal to her on a human level, she would understand. I invited her to the roastery for a private cupping session. I laid out 3 very special, very different single-origin beans. I walked her through the process, just like my grandfather used to do with me. I talked about the farmers, the terroir, the delicate notes she should be looking for. She tasted the first one, made a face, and said, "It's a bit sour." She was tasting a world-class Ethiopian yirgachefe, renowned for its bright lemony acidity. She tasted the second and said, "This one's better, bolder." It was a standard generic Sumatran bean we used as a cheap base for our dark roast blends. She didn't even bother tasting the third. She checked her watch and said, "This has been very educational, Elena, but I have a call with the marketing team. They have some exciting new ideas for our holiday cups." And she walked out. She hadn't come to connect with me or the coffee. She had come to check a box, to perform the role of an engaged CEO for 5 minutes before getting back to what she considered the real work. Selling the sizzle, not the steak. That was the day I truly understood. She would never see me. She couldn't. Because to truly see me would be to acknowledge that the empire she was so proud of was built on a craft she didn't possess and a legacy she didn't understand. The fallout from my email was both faster and slower than I expected. For 2 days, there was absolute silence. No reply. No angry phone calls. Nothing. It was the eeriest part of the whole affair. I knew they were scrambling. I could picture the scene, my mother's icy composure cracking. Leo, for the first time in his life, facing a problem he couldn't solve with a spreadsheet. Lawyers being called. Voices being raised behind closed boardroom doors. I stayed away from the office, telling my team I had a family emergency, which was, in its own way, the absolute truth. I spent those 2 days at my grandfather's old workshop, cleaning it, organizing his tools, breathing in the faint, lingering scent of old coffee and dust. It was like preparing a sanctuary for what was to come. The first crack in their wall of silence came from Leo. It was a text message that arrived at 2 a.m. on the 3rd day. It just said, "Call me. Now." I ignored it. An hour later, another one. "What the hell is this, Elena? Is this a joke? You're siding with a piece of paper over your own family?" Siding with a piece of paper. That's how he saw it. Not as our grandfather's dying wish, but as an inconvenient document. I still didn't reply. The official response came the next morning. Not from my family, but from the company's chief legal counsel. It was a formal, intimidating letter informing me that they had received my spurious claims and considered them baseless and defamatory. They asserted that the so-called covenant was a non-binding document with no legal standing, and that all company assets, including intellectual property like recipes, belonged to the corporation. They ended with a thinly veiled threat. If I pursued this frivolous action, or spoke of it publicly, they would use the full force of the company to sue me for libel and breach of contract. They thought they could scare me. They thought I was the same quiet girl who accepted the gift card for her bonus. They miscalculated. They didn't know about the notarized addendum. I had held that back. My ace in the hole. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Miss Davies, whom I had retained months ago, responded within the hour. Her reply was short and devastating. It included a high-resolution scan of the notarized final page, along with a reminder of the legal definition of fraud and the penalties for violating a notarized directive concerning personal inheritance. She concluded, "We are not claiming a breach of a corporate document. We are claiming theft of a personal asset, fraudulently misrepresented as a corporate one. All profits from the Antonio collection are therefore the personal property of our client. We have the receipts, both literal and figurative. A full accounting is expected within 10 business days, or we will file for an immediate injunction and asset freeze." That's when the real panic set in. Leo started calling me over and over. I let it go to voicemail. He left a string of increasingly desperate messages. The first was angry. "You have no idea what you're doing. You're going to destroy this company." The next was pleading. "Elena, think about the employees. Think about Grandpa's legacy. Is this what he would have wanted?" The final one was just pathetic. She's not doing well. Please, just talk to us. We can fix this." The most telling communication, however, came from my mother. It wasn't a call or a text. It was a single, cold email. Subject: disappointment. The body of the email read, "I have given you everything, a career, a purpose. I took your grandfather's little hobby and I built it into something that matters. And this is how you repay me, by trying to tear it all down out of jealousy." He was a dreamer. "Elena, I am a builder. You have made a terrible, terrible mistake." There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the truth. Just pure, unadulterated narcissism. She genuinely believed she had done nothing wrong. In her mind, she had improved upon his legacy, and the covenant was just an old man's sentimentality getting in the way of progress. That email was the final confirmation I needed. This wasn't about a misunderstanding. It was about a fundamental difference in worldview. They saw a legacy as something to be monetized. I saw it as something to be honored. They saw my grandfather's final gift to me as a corporate asset. I saw it as his last words. They had left me no choice. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. It was a battle for his soul. And I was not going to lose. The 10 days my lawyer gave them felt like a lifetime. I didn't go to work. I couldn't. The entire company was in a state of suspended animation. Rumors were flying. I heard through the grapevine, from one of the roasters who was still loyal to me, that Leo and Isabel were holding constant frantic meetings. They tried to rally the board, framing me as an ungrateful rogue employee trying to extort the company. But the notarized document had spooked the board members. They weren't family. They were investors. And the word fraud makes investors very, very nervous. The company's strategy shifted. They tried to buy me out. Their lawyer sent a settlement offer. It was a significant amount of money. A lump sum payment that would have set me up for life, in exchange for the rights to the Solstice blend and a legally binding non-disclosure agreement that would have silenced me forever. They thought my loyalty had a price tag. They thought this was about money. I instructed Miss Davies to reply with a single word. No. That's when they got desperate. Leo showed up at my apartment, unannounced. I saw him through the peephole, looking disheveled, his perfect suit wrinkled. I didn't open the door. He knocked, then banged. "Elena, I know you're in there. Open the door. We're family." I just stood there, my back against the wood, listening to his voice crack. "You can't do this. The stock is already taking a hit because of the rumors. The grocery deal is on hold. You're burning it all to the ground. For what? A recipe?" His words echoed through the door, but they didn't hit their mark. For what? He still didn't get it. I wasn't doing it for a recipe. I was doing it for the 9-year-old girl who was taught to roast beans with love. I was doing it for the 12-year-old who got cash instead of a birthday cake. I was doing it for the woman who was told she had no vision, while her own creations were being stolen in front of her eyes. I was doing it for my grandfather, whose name they were using to sell a lie. Finally, on the 10th day, their time was up. They hadn't provided an accounting. They hadn't ceased production. They had called my bluff. So we filed. The injunction landed on their desks the next morning. It was a legal bomb. A court order freezing all assets related to the Antonio collection. All sales, all marketing, all production had to stop immediately, pending a full investigation. Simultaneously, Miss Davies sent a carefully worded press release to the top 3 trade publications in the food and beverage industry. It didn't sling mud. It was professional and precise. It simply stated that a dispute had arisen over the intellectual property of Aroma Republic's most recent product line, based on newly discovered documents from the company's founder, Antonio Vesco. The story broke that afternoon. At first it was a small piece on an industry blog, but it spread like wildfire. Aroma Republic founder's granddaughter contests ownership of hit product line. The narrative was irresistible. The hidden document, the family schism, the battle for the soul of a beloved brand. The public image they had so carefully cultivated for years began to crack. The story of the authentic family-run company was suddenly replaced by a much darker, more compelling one. My mother's reaction was terrifying in its intensity. She couldn't fight me on the legal front anymore, so she came after me on the personal one. She launched a smear campaign among our extended family and their social circle. She told them I was mentally unstable, that I was bitter and jealous of Leo's success. She claimed I had forged the documents out of spite. Some believed her. I got calls from aunts and uncles I hadn't spoken to in years, telling me I was tearing the family apart, that I should be ashamed. But the final, most direct confrontation happened a week later. I was at the roastery, late at night, packing my personal belongings. I knew my time there was over, no matter how this ended. The door burst open and my mother stood there, flanked by Leo. Her face was a mask of cold fury. There was no pretense of concern, no fake affection. This was her, stripped of all her PR polish. "How dare you?" she said, her voice low and venomous. "After everything I've done, I built this, me. He was just a man with a hobby. I turned it into an empire." "You built it on his work," I said, my voice steady. I refused to let her see me shake. "You built it on a lie." "It's business!" Leo cut in, his voice shrill. "Things change. He was stuck in the past. We modernized. We made it profitable." "You made it hollow," I replied, looking directly at my mother. "You took his name, and you took his greatest work, a gift he left for me, and you sold it. You didn't just commit fraud. You desecrated his memory." "You will get nothing," my mother hissed, taking a step closer. "I will burn this company to the ground before I let you have 1 penny or 1 ounce of credit. You are nothing. You've always been nothing. Just a sentimental fool who plays with beans in the back room. That was it. That was the core of it all. To her, I was nothing. My work was nothing. My grandfather's art was nothing. Only profit and image mattered. In that moment, looking at her rage-contorted face, I didn't feel hurt. I felt pity. She had won the world but had lost her own soul so completely, she didn't even know it was gone. "It's already over," I said softly. I picked up my box of things. "You just haven't realized it yet." I walked towards the door. Leo moved to block my way. I didn't stop. I just looked at him, at his expensive suit and his panicked eyes. For the first time, he looked small. He faltered, stepping aside. I walked past my mother without another glance. As I left the building that had been my prison for a decade, I didn't look back. The battle wasn't over, but the war for my own spirit had already been won. The empire didn't crumble overnight. It was more like a slow structural collapse. The injunction was the first major blow. Production of their cash cow product was frozen, and the legal fees started mounting at an alarming rate. The press, once so friendly, turned predatory. Every new court filing was a headline. The story of the Aroma Republic feud was a business section staple. Their carefully constructed brand of family-centric authenticity was in tatters. The board of directors, once my mother's loyal allies, began to mutiny. They were businessmen, not family members. Their loyalty was to the bottom line, and the bottom line was bleeding. An emergency shareholders meeting was called. I wasn't there, but I heard about it from Ms. Davies. My mother and Leo tried to spin the narrative, painting me as a greedy disruptor. But my lawyer had already sent a private briefing to every board member, complete with the notarized covenant and the lab analysis. They were faced with irrefutable evidence of fraud. The result was a vote of no confidence. My mother was forced to step down as CEO, and Leo was stripped of his title as CFO, pending the outcome of the legal case. They were pushed out of the company they believed they owned. A neutral interim CEO was brought in to manage the crisis. It was a stunning, humiliating downfall. They hadn't just lost a lawsuit, they had lost their kingdom. Their personal lives unraveled just as quickly. My mother, stripped of her power and public identity, retreated into her large, empty house. She refused to speak to anyone. The society friends who once flocked to her galas now avoided her calls. She had built her entire world on the foundation of being the brilliant matriarch of Aroma Republic. Without it, she was just a woman alone in a mansion, a queen in exile. Leo's fall was less dramatic, but perhaps more pathetic. He tried to maintain his bravado, but without the company credit card and the CFO title, his charm wore thin. His fair-weather friends disappeared. He was facing potential legal charges for his role in the fraud. I saw him once, months later, across the street from a cafe. He looked diminished. His suit wasn't as sharp. His shoulders were slumped. He was just another guy, the phantom limb of his former power clearly aching. He saw me looking, and for a moment his eyes were filled with a raw, desperate hatred. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. We haven't spoken since. The court case eventually settled. Faced with the mountain of evidence, the company had no choice. The settlement was confidential, but it was comprehensive. The rights to the Solstice blend, my grandfather's blend, were legally and publicly affirmed as my personal property. I was also given a significant financial settlement, representing the profits they had made from my stolen inheritance. But more importantly, the company was forced to issue a public retraction and apology. They had to admit that the Antonio collection was based on the work of the founder, not the innovations of the former management. They had to tell the truth. I never wanted to run Aroma Republic. I never wanted their empire. So I took the settlement money and did the one thing that felt right. I bought the original building, the first small cafe and roastery my grandfather ever opened, which the company had sold off years ago in a cost-cutting measure. It was small, a little run-down, but it had good bones. It had his spirit in the walls. That's where I am now. This isn't a multinational corporation. It's just a roastery. I named it Solstice. Just that. No last names, no corporate branding. I have a small team of 3 people who are as passionate about coffee as I am. We source our beans from small family-owned farms, the kind of people my grandfather used to work with. We roast in small batches. We know our customers by name. Some days are hard. The profit margins are thin. The work is exhausting. But every morning when I walk in and the smell of fresh roasting coffee hits me, I feel free. I don't know what the future holds for Aroma Republic. With its reputation shattered and its leadership gone, it's a ghost of its former self. Maybe it will survive. Maybe it won't. It's not my concern anymore. My mother and brother, I hear they sold the mansion and moved away. They are a closed chapter in my life. A story of what happens when ambition eclipses love. When legacy becomes a brand instead of a responsibility. Sometimes I sit in my quiet roastery after a long day, cupping a new batch of beans, and I think about them. I don't feel anger anymore. I don't even feel triumph. I just feel a quiet sense of sorrow for what they lost. Not the money or the company, but the chance to be part of something real. They had a kingdom, but they never understood the magic it was built on. They were so busy selling the story, they forgot to live it. They said I had no vision, but my vision was always clear. It just wasn't as big as theirs. It wasn't about conquering the world. It was about creating one perfect cup of coffee. A cup that tells a story. My grandfather's story. And now, my own. He taught me that the best flavors are often the ones that take the longest to develop. The ones that require patience and care. It turns out, the same is true for justice. So I have to ask you, was it worth it? To tear down a family empire to protect a principle? Some would call what I did revenge. Others might call it justice. I just call it keeping a promise. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Would you have taken the settlement and the silence? Or would you have burned it all down to reclaim the truth? And if you appreciate stories about finding your own path, consider subscribing. There are always more stories brewing.